Hello, welcome to a video on customizing a brush. So there's a brush in Procreate that I like. Let's look at it. Here it is. It's in the calligraphy brush set, and the name of the brush is Blotchy. It has some wonderful watercolor-ish aspects to it. Kind of like a regular ink. If you go over it again, it will get the color will get intense. If you start with a darker color, it'll also get even more darker. So you can make these very rich colors. What I don't like about it. What I don't like about it initially, this is from the calligraphy set, so it has a smoothing function added to it. If you try to do a really jagged line with it, it'll still kind of curve it around. So that's one of the things I want to initially start is by removing that function. So let's make a copy of this. To make a copy of the brush, you have to have the brush selected, slide over to the left, and select duplicate. What it will do is it'll create a copy of the brush on top of the brush that was selected. It'll usually just add a space and the 1 digit after the existing name. And you'll also get this little icon here, this little squiggle up at the top of the thumbnail for that particular brush. That lets you know that this is a duplicate or a custom brush. Now, I want to add this to a new brush library, a new brush set. So think of this as being my own little jar of brushes that I want to be able to use. So up here where it says brush library, to add a new brush set, you have to drag down on this. And then you'll get a plus sign underneath. So I'm going to click on that. It'll initially say untitled set. And let's call that blotchy work. Okay, so right now, here's blotchy work. There are no brushes in there. So then we have to move that brush, a copy of that brush into there. So here's calligraphy. I'm going to click this with my finger, and I'm going to come up here to blotchy work. And this usually takes me a few tries. There it goes. But actually it went into the wrong one. What I'm going to do is move blotchy works down because it seems to be easier to get to a set further down. So I'm going to grab this guy again. And I still missed it. This sometimes takes me many tries. This is a very frustrating thing. No? There we go. We finally got it in there. There's blotchy work, which has one brush in there. Now, what I want to do is take off a function in this brush called streamline. So go back and show you that again. So once we have a brush that is selected and it's in blue, if I press on it again, I get into the brush studio, and there is all sorts of properties for a brush. So let's go into stroke path. The feature of the blotchy brush that I do not like is called streamline. So I'm going to turn that all the way off just by sliding that all the way over. And I'm going to rename that brush. So to rename the brush, you have to come all the way down here to About This Brush. And here it says blotchy 1. If I click up in there, it'll bring up my keyboard. So I can say blotchy, and I'm just going to say NSL for no streamline. I turn off that streamline function a lot when I duplicate stuff out of the calligraphy brush set, so that's kind of a common abbreviation for me. And let's just say done. Or actually, let's first try it within this drawing pad here. So I'm going to clear the drawing pad. And now I can make pretty much nice sharp items. If I had that streamline on, you can see how it moves the stroke around, but I'm going to have it nice and sharp. And I'm going to say done. So I now have my blotchy, no streamline. So let's see how that works on this canvas. So let me clear this. Clear. And seems to be doing what I want. Now if I go over a certain area, it gets darker and darker. If I start with a very light color, let me change over to the classic mode. So let me try this 100% saturated color. What I will do is clear and see how this changes. So it's staying nice and rich. I can do very sharp, pointed items. If I choose a semi-saturated color, so here's saturation and brightness being in the midtone. Make it bigger. I can go nice and dark pretty quickly. One thing about how this particular brush works is if you have the brightness turned all the way up, so in that case you're selecting a color from this top line up here, it will keep that. But if you're choosing a color with a little bit less, so let's say right here, each additional stroke you make will increase the darkness. So let's take a peek at that using the value slider. So here is our mid red. As we go over it, this brightness slider will continue to go down. So let's see, we're at 17%. Let's see how dark it has become. It has dropped all the way to 0. So that's a pure black there in the center. So we kind of have an idea of how this brush works. Let's also realize how big and how small the sliders work. So this would be the smallest It's a very fine line. It's nice. The midpoint. And the big one can go pretty big. So let's choose a lighter color. So it's kind of a fun brush. It's definitely blotchy. However, you can add a lot of texture to a drawing with this. One thing you cannot do, though, you can't really make anything lighter. Let's go back to classic. So here I am, pure white. Pure white up in this corner. It's not doing anything. How that works, let's take a look at the brush. Under this rendering option, you have this blend mode. This says how this ink works on the canvas. In this case, this is a multiply mode. So it will add whatever brightness and color to the drawing. But as you go over again and again and again, it's just going to get darker and darker and darker. However, we can change that. So let's create a copy of this brush, but one that, as we go over, rather than making things darker, makes objects lighter. So again, we're going to slide over, we're going to say duplicate, and as you see, it puts that little space and a 1 after the name. So we're going to click that one. It still has the streamline turned off, or actually it's up at 1%. Let's go ahead and clear that out. We'll go down to rendering. And instead of this blend mode of multiply, we're going to select lighten. Now we could also use normal. Let's play with normal first. So normal says I'm just going to be like an opaque diluted paint over everything, which is fine. It may not be the effect that we want, though. So I'm going to bring that back. And we're going to take another gander at the brush studio. I'm going to change this from normal to lighten. And what I should have done is also gone into about the brush. So it's blotchy, no streamline. And I think I'm going to call it lighten. So blotchy, lighten, NSL. Let's say done. So now I could still choose a color. So here I have this, let's go to a green shade. Kind of dark green shade. And let's play with this. So the more I go over it, it's going to increase the saturation. And it's also going to, let's take a peek, increase the brightness, so rather it'll go lighter rather than darker. It'll go as bright, will go brighter if I have it up here at the top. So and if I choose white, let's first start. If I choose black, it'll take me a while to build up on top of another color. However, if I choose white, I can rapidly lighten and also take any value out of what's underneath. And by mixing in a color, we can rapidly introduce some color into this drawing. But if we want to bring something down, so here I have this dark green, I can switch over to the other brush and it will add color but also darkness. Switch back over to lighten. Bring out some very bright colors. So I have these two brushes I kind of like. Blotchy lighten, no streamline, and just blotchy, no streamline. However, one thing I'm not too wild about these brushes is how big they can get. So if we clear this layer, here I have the maximum size set. I'd kind of like to go even bigger. I mean, it's very nice at the small end. You can do something very detailed. But let's worry about working larger. So I'm going to go ahead and clear. So what I'm going to do is duplicate both of these guys. So I'm going to say duplicate. And duplicate. And let's say blotchy NSL. So this is going to be my big version of this. And where I change that is down in properties. So here we have maximum size, minimum size. I'm going to allow this to come up bigger. I'm going to say 250. That's good, 253. So So let's check this first. Well, let's go ahead and name this NSL Big. Okay, so I can rapidly fill the screen up with it. It's kind of fun to be able to work big. And on the small end, I can still take it down pretty small. So I like that. So we have our blotchy NSL Big. And let's create our blotchy lighten NSL Big. So again, going down to properties, maximum size. It was what, 253? There we go. And about the brush, I'm gonna say it's big. So blotchy, lighten, NSL Big. Say done. So let's give that a gander. So here I am using it very small. Here I am using it very big. Let's switch that back over. Now, one thing to remember is once, in this case, I'm using the non-lightened version, so it'll go dark. But once you've gone really dark, you choose a different color, you're not going to be able to see that. Now on the lightened one, so here's this bright green. Likewise, as soon as you get it up to maximum brightness and you go to change to a different color, you may or may not be able to affect that. It's kind of determined by, at this point, the mixture of blue cyan, actually it would be blue cyan, the RGB colors. So this yellow is all the way up. If I try to add a blue to that, it will add that blue, but it'll take it over to white. So it may not always work initially the way you think it's going to work, but these are very fun brushes to use. And if you ask, well, what have I used these brushes to create before? I actually did my 12 Days of Christmas using these guys. I try to pick a new brush to do the 12 Days of Christmas, either in December or starting on Christmas Day. So let's go back to the gallery. And here's an example of the 3 French hens. If we play this back, I have these very faint brushes. I often use these just with very low transparency. Oh, excuse me. With very high transparency. If I need sharp lines, I'll carve those in by putting each figure on a layer if I know that it needs to have a sharp edge, like the Palo Verde tree. In this case, I'm using these brushes, just slowly daubing everything in. I will occasionally switch over to other brushes to add some sharp detail, but there's a lot you can do just by using these soft brushes and then carving in the hard lines. Anytime you're using one of these daubing brushes, may take longer than you think, but take the time to do it. You may want to initially start with a much larger subject than these 3 small items. But this is a great way to build up a fluffy kind of subject. One issue you may have when you're doing these daubing type paintings is the area between daubs, of course, is transparent, so you may need to lay down a base layer for the shape first so that the other layers are not showing through, unless that is an effect that you do want. Now when working with these, if I'm adding color, it's too dark, I have to switch brushes over to the lighten brush. Having those next to each other makes it quicker to be able to hop back and forth, and especially having them in the same brush set will save you quite a bit of time. Now I did do some final color adjusting on those to make the guys pop, and also to sharpen up some of the lines. If we look at the layer setup for a drawing like this, a background, a little more moodiness in the background. Much later on I came in and I add the little texture to the ground there. The Palo Verde tree I did in 2 layers. So we have the base layer, and then also created a clipping mask layer to add shadow and highlights. The other hens hopped in on their own layers. And a signature on its own. So that's how you can use these layers. Let me just do another quick little demo. To make the sound, to make it go away. Going to create another square one. If I am doing something fluffy, I can also take advantage of the fact that overlap will give you a little bit more, between the dots will give you a little bit more color variation. And you can also use different size, especially if you're working with the opacity set lower. Don't be afraid about working with different size dots. And mixing it up a bit. And again, if you want something to pop, grab an eraser. My favorite eraser is the round brush. You can sharpen up an edge. As soon as you do that, you kind of immediately take away the fluffiness of a layer. You can always put that back on. And if you do need to further tune an edge, don't forget that you may want to, rather than using an eraser, go ahead, create a mask, switch your paintbrush over to your tool that you would normally use for erasing. And let's smooth that out. Do a soft edge. So the soft edge works well with these fluffy kind of figures. You can have the edge disappear. Getting a nice indistinct ledge or edge. So play with that too. So again, in this demo, what I did is I created this bucket of brushes, this brush set called Blotchy Work. Took the blotchy brush from the calligraphy brush set, created a new brush set, and created four riffs on that delivered brush. So a little tweaking can make for a very useful brush. Have a good one. Thank you.